Moonlight lay across the river so evenly, it felt as if some invisible hand had stretched a silver ribbon between the banks. The water moved slowly, deliberately, and in its unhurried flow there was something mesmerizing. I sat on the old wooden jetty, my hand still smelling of paint, though I no longer felt like painting, I only wanted to listen. At first, it sounded like ordinary splashing. Then fragments of melody began to emerge, faint, distant, as if someone far away were playing. The sounds came not from the wind, nor from night birds, they rose from deep within the current itself. I had come here seeking silence, but found something else, a strange, elusive feeling, as if the river were speaking to me. And each night, that conversation grew more insistent. That night, I saw her for the first time. At first, a dark shape on the glowing water, then, a pair of eyes reflecting the moon so brightly I had to squint. An otter, large, wet, with a strand of riverweed around her neck, stared straight at me, unblinking. She moved closer, and I noticed something dark tangled in her fur, pulling at her limbs. A net. I stepped down to the water without thinking. The moon swayed in her eyes, and for a moment I thought I saw distant stars flicker there. I knelt, the water stung with cold, but my fingers reached her fur. She didn't flinch, didn't try to escape, only watched me, as if deciding whether to trust. The net was thin but strong, biting into skin and fur. Slowly, carefully, I untangled it from her paws, trying not to hurt her. When the last knot came free, she shook off the droplets and froze. It seemed she might vanish into the dark, as she was meant to. But instead, she swam closer, touched my palm with her nose, and only then dove beneath the surface. I expected her to be gone forever. But a moment later, the river sang again, louder now, clearer. And in that melody I caught a strange rhythm, like the echo of footsteps on a stone path. Back at the house, I couldn't sleep. Outside, the wind sifted through bare branches, and in my ears the river still played. I could almost see its silver ribbon stretching deep into the forest, to places where no roads or villages marked the map. The next morning, I returned to the water with my sketchbook, determined to draw what I had heard in the night. But instead of the familiar smooth surface, I saw tracks, small paw prints trailing across the sandy bank toward the woods. And in my chest stirred the feeling that if I followed them, I would see not only the otter. I stood on the river bank, clutching my sketchbook, hesitating. The tracks led into the forest, where the morning mist gathered in thick swirls, reluctant to let the sunlight through. It seemed that just beyond the first line of trees, the air grew denser, and the sounds, quieter. I took a step. The sand beneath my feet gave way to soft moss, the shift was barely noticeable, yet my body felt it clearly, as if I'd crossed a boundary. The forest smelled of damp bark and something else, spicy, resinous, like warmed pine sap. The otter's tracks were sharp, as if left only moments ago. I walked carefully, trying not to make a sound, listening. Somewhere off to the side, a jay shrieked, but its cry quickly drowned in another sound, familiar, yet utterly out of place. Through the trees, faintly, came the same nighttime melody of the river. I froze. Here, in the forest, it shouldn't exist, the water was far off, and yet the sound seemed to rise from beneath the ground. It urged me forward. After a few minutes, the trees parted, revealing a small ravine. At its center shimmered a pool, tiny, ringed with black stones. And at the very edge, her paws in the water, stood the otter. She lifted her head and looked straight at me. Around her eyes, the morning light sparkled like silver, and once again I saw distant stars flicker in their depths. I descended into the ravine, careful not to slip on the damp clay. The pool was still as glass, reflecting the sky and treetops, but something was off. The sun above was pale, morning soft, yet in the reflection it burned with the warm gold of sunset. I crouched by the water, and in that instant, the melody grew clearer, not splashing, not rustling, but a quiet, almost human singing. I tried to catch the words, but the language was unfamiliar, though every inflection stirred a strange warmth in my chest. The otter didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the water, and I understood, I wasn't the only one hearing the song. She stepped forward, touched the surface with her paw, and the ripples, instead of spreading outward, began to draw inward, toward the center of the pool. Beneath the reflection of the sunset sky, something stirred. A faint silhouette, like a branch fallen into the water, but it grew, sharpened. I reached out, I don't know why. And when my fingertips brushed the surface, it was warm. Not cool, as it should be in the morning, but warm, as if it had basked under summer sun. The otter looked at me, and in her eyes flickered something, not fear, but a warning. The water at the center of the pool quivered, and from its depths a silhouette began to emerge, elongated, fluid, with curves that echoed the flow of the river itself. At first, I thought it was a large fish, but its movements were too slow, almost regal. Gradually, the contours sharpened. It resembled a serpent, but with a broad, flat head and long fins trailing along its sides. Its scales, if they were scales, shimmered like moonlight dancing on water. I froze, afraid to blink. The creature rose closer to the surface, and for a moment, I thought I saw my own reflection in its eyes, dark and deep, like the otter's. The melody shifted. Now it carried not only song, but a low, resonant rhythm, as if the heart of the earth were beating nearby. The otter stepped back, but didn't leave. She watched me as if waiting for a word, a gesture. "Who are you?" I whispered. The water trembled again, and at the center of the pool, an object appeared, a stone, perfectly round, its cracks glowing with a soft, warm light. It rose slowly, breaking the mirror-like surface, and hovered before me, dripping golden droplets. I didn't feel fear or joy, only reached out, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The stone was warm, almost alive. Through my palm, I felt a faint vibration, like distant thunder, and a strange weight, as though I held something far greater than a small, round rock. For a moment, images flooded my vision, the river in every season, the forest blanketed in snow, sunlight piercing spring mist, flocks of birds wheeling over water. They flickered too quickly to grasp, too vivid to ignore. And then I saw myself. Standing on the same jetty where I'd sat the night before, only now, I wasn't alone. A whole group of otters surrounded me, and behind them, glowing in the river, was the same golden circle I now held. When I blinked, the vision vanished. The stone was just a stone again, or nearly. Its cracks still pulsed with light, and the melody in the air softened, as if soothed. The otter stepped closer and, without breaking eye contact, touched the stone with her nose. Then she turned sharply and headed toward the forest, casting a brief glance back, one that needed no words, "Come." I looked once more at the pool, its depths now held only the reflection of the morning sky. Clutching the stone, I followed her. We walked deeper into the forest. The mist, light and playful in the morning, had thickened, clinging to branches, creeping beneath my collar. The birds had long fallen silent, and each step on the moss felt too loud. The otter moved swiftly, almost soundlessly, glancing back now and then to make sure I was still following. I kept the stone in my jacket pocket, and despite the chill in the air, it remained warm. Sometimes I thought I could feel it pulsing, in rhythm with my footsteps, or with something waiting ahead. The path narrowed. Tree roots jutted from the ground like grasping fingers. One particularly thick root was slick, and I nearly fell. When I looked up, the otter was gone. "Hey!" I called in a whisper, but my voice was swallowed by the fog. The answer came not as song, but as sound, the crack of a branch somewhere to the side. I froze. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and far too close. A dark shape emerged between the trunks. At first, I thought it was a boar, but the silhouette was taller, broader, with something like long antlers glinting faintly in the mist. The creature stopped, and in its eyes flickered the same soft golden light that radiated from the stone. I stepped back, but my foot slipped into a hollow, throwing me off balance. At that moment, the otter burst from the fog, positioning herself between me and the creature, and let out a sound, something between a hiss and a low whistle. The creature froze, turned its head toward her, and slowly dissolved into the mist, as if melting into the air. The otter looked at me, no time to explain, and darted forward. We walked for a long time, and the fog began to thin, revealing a strangely luminous space. At first, I thought it was just a sunbeam breaking through the canopy, but the light was different, soft, golden, like the last hour before sunset, though it was still morning. The trees here were taller, thicker than anywhere else in the forest. Their bark shimmered as if wet, and the leaves glowed with shifting colors, as though each held a drop of dew, though I knew there shouldn't be any dew now. I noticed my footsteps had grown quieter, as if the ground beneath me had turned springy. Somewhere nearby, a stream murmured, but the sound of water was strange, carrying the echo of that river melody, now reduced to a whisper. The otter stopped at a great tree whose roots formed something like an arch. Beneath it, a spring bubbled, a clear ribbon of water flowing deep, then vanishing beneath the moss. But the strange thing was that the water didn't flow downward. It rose, a thin stream climbing toward the tree's crown, dissolving into its leaves. I stood there, unable to believe my eyes. And then the stone in my pocket began to pulse more strongly, as if calling me toward the source. The otter stepped to the water, looked at me, and entered. And the water, instead of splashing, closed over her back like living fabric. We walked along the stream, and after a while the forest began to thin. Between the trees, remnants of an old clearing emerged, overgrown with tall grass and shrubs. Scattered along the bank were fragments, shards of broken pottery, clay pieces, a long-collapsed wooden crate. I bent down and carefully picked up one of the shards, its edges sharpened by time, its surface veined with a fine web of cracks. Nearby, I noticed a patch of earth blackened by charcoal, likely the remains of a fire pit. "Someone lived here," I said aloud. "Maybe long ago, but something of them remains." The otter approached one of the large stones by the water and lay down, watching me with a calm, almost human gaze. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept across the clearing, and in the rustle of leaves I heard the quiet murmur of the river, the same melody I'd heard in the night. I understood then. Here, at the very source, the river and the past were intertwined, just as I was now intertwined with this otter. I sat gently at the edge of the fire pit, letting my eyes wander over the scattered fragments. They seemed to be pieces of dishes, plates, cups, perhaps pitchers. The stones around the fire were darkened and smoothed by flame and time. Suddenly, memories surfaced, stories told by the village elders. They spoke of hunters and fishermen who once lived here, at the river's source, people who knew the forest and the water as intimately as I do now. They would vanish for long stretches, leaving behind only traces and objects that now felt like fragments of legend. I touched a piece of clay, cold, yet surprisingly light. It felt as though it could speak, if only it knew how. The otter rose and padded quietly toward me. Her eyes gleamed, as if she understood what I was thinking. "We're not here by chance," I whispered to myself. "Something binds us to this place." The wind rose again, playing with the grass and leaves. The river murmured nearby, and in its sound I once more heard that quiet, half-forgotten melody, the song of life that flows unbroken through the centuries. I reached deeper into my backpack and found the stone, still warm, almost alive. Its glow had faded, but I could still feel its pulse in my palm. Then my gaze fell on a small hollow in the earth, barely visible, as if someone had recently dug there. Curiosity took hold, and I gently brushed away the grass covering the spot. Beneath it lay an old wooden box, coated in moss and dirt. I pried it open with effort. Inside was a bundle of yellowed paper, a quill, and a small amulet made of the same stone as the one in my pocket. On the bundle, written in careful script, were the words, "Whoever finds this sign must remember, the river carries not only water, but memory. Your heart is now bound to its flow. Protect it, and it will help you find your way home." The otter stepped closer, and her eyes met mine. In them was something more than animal. I knew then, this was the beginning of a journey that would change everything. After finding the box and the message, I felt I couldn't simply move on. I had to understand what the river truly held. The otter and I continued our journey, and soon we came upon an old fallen tree. Carved into its bark were ancient symbols, signs of water, life, and protection. I traced the markings with my fingers, and suddenly a distant sound reached me, as if the forest had awakened. Birds stirred, the wind picked up, and I saw familiar shapes flickering in the branches, not mythical creatures, but the animals that truly lived here, foxes, a deer, and of course, otters. Each place along the path held a story, a weathered stone by the river bank, where, according to legend, people once made pacts with nature. A clearing where the river's guardians gathered. An abandoned hut that once held knowledge and amulets. Gradually, I began to see that every step was a lesson. To walk with nature required attention and respect. The otter seemed to guide me, showing when to pause and listen, when to move forward. At some point, I felt a connection to those who came before. My heart began to respond to the river's flow, to the whisper of the wind. And then came the realization, my mission was not merely to protect the river, but to become its voice for those who had forgotten how to listen. We walked a narrow path along the bank when the otter suddenly stopped, staring intently into the bushes. I listened. A faint, plaintive squeak came from the other side. As I approached, I saw a small leveret, its paw caught in the branches, unable to free itself. Its eyes were wide with fear, its breath shallow and uneven. The otter hissed softly, as if saying, "Help is needed." I gently parted the branches and freed the little hare. It bolted at once, but stumbled. The injured paw gave way. I saw it was scratched, perhaps slightly sprained. Without hesitation, I took a small piece of cloth from my backpack and wrapped the paw gently. The leveret sat for a moment, looking at me, then, as if in thanks, sprang up and disappeared into the underbrush. The otter came over and brushed against my leg, a simple gesture of trust and gratitude. In that moment, I felt I was no longer just a guest in this forest, but part of something greater. Nature, like people, needs kindness, attention, and care. After the encounter with the leveret, I felt a deeper call to be more attentive, more generous toward the world around me. Every sound, every movement seemed imbued with meaning. The otter and I continued on, and soon came upon another fallen tree, partially blocking the path. From beneath it came a faint squeak. Someone was trapped. I carefully peered under the branches and saw a young hedgehog caught between the roots. Its spines trembled with fear, and it couldn't escape. Without hesitation, I began gently pulling the branches apart, careful not to harm the creature. The otter helped, darting around, showing me where to press, where to lift. At last, the hedgehog wriggled free and looked at us with quiet gratitude. It slowly disappeared into the bushes, and I felt a warmth rise inside me, not from the stone in my pocket, but from a simple human act. In that moment, I understood, kindness is not just a word or an idea. It is an action, one that binds us to the world we call home. The day was slipping toward dusk, and the sunlight had turned soft and warm. We stepped into a clearing by the wide part of the river, a place that felt like the heart of the forest. The water here was clear, and tall willows grew along the banks, their branches lazily brushing the surface. But the calm was deceptive. In the distance, I saw the willows shudder, and then came a muffled, anxious howl, like a creature in distress. The otter darted along the shore, urging me to follow. The closer we came, the louder the sound grew, until it became a desperate cry. At the water's edge, I saw it, a large, young fawn tangled in a net, likely left behind by fishermen or someone who hadn't considered the consequences. It thrashed, trying to break free, but the more it struggled, the tighter the net became. Its eyes were wide with fear, its breath ragged and heavy. The otter plunged into the water, and I followed. Together, we began to untangle the net, whispering softly so as not to frighten the animal. It was difficult. Branches and mesh restricted the fawn's movements, and every wrong move risked causing pain. But slowly, with the otter's help, we freed it. The fawn gasped, then gathered its strength and fled into the forest, glancing back as if to thank us. I felt that this night had brought not just exhaustion, but a deep understanding. Our kindness doesn't merely save, it restores a bond torn by time and neglect. When the fawn vanished into the forest shadows, I remained by the river bank, feeling my heartbeat slowly settle. The water whispered gently beneath my feet, as if reminding me, everything is connected, the river, the forest, the animals, and myself. The otter came to me and brushed against my leg. Her trust was wordless, but clearer than any spoken gratitude. In that moment, I knew I could no longer remain a mere observer. I had to become a guardian of this connection, between human and nature, between past and present. Care, attention, and kindness, these are not weaknesses, but strengths. Strengths that can change the course of things and offer hope. I took the stone from my pocket. It no longer simply glowed, it felt like part of me, a quiet reminder that my actions mattered. The evening mist began to lift, revealing a path, not just through the forest, but within myself. Now I knew where to go, and what I must do. That night, I dreamed a strange yet astonishingly clear dream. The stone I carried in my pocket began to glow with a soft blue light. It seemed alive, warm, beckoning, as if it understood that I was meant to follow. I rose, but felt no weight in my legs. My steps were light, like those of a shadow. The stone floated ahead of me through the air, and I followed it to the river, which shimmered in the darkness as though moonlight had dissolved into its waters. At the shore, an unusual council awaited me. Dozens of animals stood shoulder to shoulder, gathered as if for an ancient, secret assembly. In the moonlight, their silhouettes cast long shadows across the silver sand. Moose stood motionless, their antlers like branching crowns, their eyes glowing with quiet wisdom. Deer pressed their slender-legged fawns close, shielding them from some unseen danger, but there was no fear in their gaze, only warm curiosity. Foxes, with soft, flame-colored tails, sat a little apart. Their posture held the tension of readiness to flee, yet also a deep respect for what was unfolding. A mother bear, broad and steadfast as the earth itself, stood with two restless cubs nestled against her. They peeked out from behind her paws, wide-eyed and wondering. Above, birds circled and perched on the low branches of the willows, owls with enormous eyes, song thrushes, even a rare heron, still and solemn as if carved from stone. And among them all, the small otter, achingly familiar, her fur gleaming like wet silk. Beside her, a tiny pup stared at me with dark, bead-like eyes, unblinking. In their gaze was not just trust, but something deeper, as though they recognized me as one of their own. They did not speak, but I understood everything without words. It was a welcome, and a request, to stay, to remain close, to become part of them.